Good evening. I hereby convene the April 9th, 2013 regularly scheduled trustee meetings. Mr. Jones, roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Present.
Mrs. Stoker?
Here.
Please,
And Mr. Lang has no
enter
commitment.
the record that Mr. Lane has a personal conflict. He cannot be here tonight.
Correct.
Please arise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the first order of meeting is citizens' comment. First, citizens' comment. If you are a resident, business owner, or landowner in Westchester Township and wish to address the township trustees, please, we have 5 people sign up tonight now. And you have 2 minutes each to address to the trustee. Now, at the end of the meeting, we have the second part of trustee meeting, citizens comment, and you can come up to the podium and speak. First person sign up is Mr. Tom Egbert. Please come forward. State your name and address.
My name is Tom Eggert. I live at 7672 Weathersfield Drive. Thank you for the time to speak. I and many of my neighbors spent 5 months fighting off a major development proposed by Silverman and Kroger. We consider this development a threat to the health of our neighborhood and a threat to the safety of the residents and their children. One of the issues of safety was the lack of sidewalks in our neighborhood. Without these sidewalks, the residents and children are forced to walk on the sides of the roadway, and it can be very dangerous. My wife and I lived in the Landings apartment complex for 1 full year. It is located directly across from the proposed multi-purpose path along the north side of Smith Road. For many months, my wife and I would take our daily walk using the parking lot of the Landings apartment complex. We found out very quickly that you have to be very, very careful. There are many cars rushing through the main part of the lot, and many more pulling out in and out of parking spots. Many times, my wife and I wished that the current walking path alongside Beckett Ridge extended down to the Landings and beyond. If that was the case, we could just cross the street and have a nice, safe walk to Beckett Park or walk down to Kroger's and pick up a gallon of milk. I may be seen by some as anti-development in Westchester, but that's far from the case. I am pro-development when it positively affects the Westchester residents. As long as this proposed walkway does not infringe upon personal property rights and remains on the right-of-way unless an easement is granted, then I'm confident this proposed multi-purpose path and connector will have a positive effect for the health, safety, and well-being of the Westchester residents. Concerning the funding, I've read through the OKI application process and found nothing sinister to report, nor is there a hint of anything Orwellian or Glenbeckian. I have it right here. If anybody would like to review it, please see me. If these funds are requested, and as long as Westchester Township meets the OKI criteria and their project is found worthy via the point rating system, and if the money is still available, only then will the funds be granted. But what about taking a handout from Uncle Sam? Well, in this case, Uncle Sam is looking for a return on his investment. In the OKI application, the funding plan goals and objectives are based on OKI 2040 Regional Transportation Plan, updated 2012, and must return value to the community, some of which is based on environmental protection and energy conservation, system integration and connectivity, and safety. The project that we're talking about will run a bit over $300K of U.S. government money. Let's say an inflated number of 1/2 of that, or $150,000, will become new U.S. debt. The current U.S. government is clocking new national debt at a rate of $150,000 every 5 seconds. There's $150,000 right there. So politics and philosophy aside, logically speaking, this little project of discussion is absolutely meaningless to the U.S. national debt, absolutely meaningless to the debt of your children, absolutely meaningless to the debt of your children's children. It would be impractical not to apply for federal funds that would be allocated to other transportation alternatives regardless of what we do. So philosophy and politics aside, Based solely on the well-being and safety of the residents alone, this project is beneficial to Westchester, worthy of funding, and should be built.
Time, Mr. Eagle. Thank you, Mr. Eagle. We have Mr. Carl Ruhlman.
Good evening. I'm Carl Ruhlman, 8285 Vental Drive. I'm asking again that we not put future debt on Westchester's books by approving the motion regarding construction and installation of a multipurpose path along the north side of Smith Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruhlman. We have Mr. Kevin Snell. Apologize if I'm mispronouncing it.
Kevin Snell, 4433 Breakers Point. My wife and I have been residents in the villages of Providence for about 5 years now. Part of the draw of moving to Westchester when we did was the fact that it appeared to be a young, growing, and active community. That has definitely proven to be the case. With parks like Beckett Park and Voice of America, we felt like we had many options available for our active lifestyle. However, over the years, I've realized how fragmented the existing pathway system is in Westchester. For instance, there's no safe way for bikers or runners to access the Port Union Trail or VOA. In addition, many families don't have safe, easy access to Beckett Park, even though they live in close proximity to it. The construction of a multi-purpose path along Smith Road would allow Westchester to begin to connect its already existing pathway system. Because of this, I urge the board to move forward with applying for this grant. While I understand some of the opposition's points of view with regards to using federal funds, I believe this is a debate for a different time and different issue. Transportation Alternatives Program funds have already been set aside for projects such as this one. If we don't use these funds, other communities will. I believe you will find ample support to move forward in applying for this grant from the many runners and bikers that we have here today. You will also find support from the more than 5,000 runners and walkers who participated in Westchester's Shamrock Shuffle just last month. Opportunities to improve our growing community should be taken advantage of, especially when a levy is not needed to do it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Mark Dunaway?
I just signed in, so you want me now? No, he's not here for citizens' comments. He's here for the presentation. So.
Mr. Hagen Kramer.
Jürgen Hagen Kramer, live at 8808 Timber Chase Court. Yeah, I would like to express my support for this multi-purpose bike path, pedestrian path. Clearly here in Westchester, we need more of those hiking, biking paths. In the past, I've been living here for 8 years now. When we moved here, there were even less bike paths available and pedestrian paths. Now, the really big improvement to our neighborhood community was putting in the path along Union Center Boulevard and adding the park areas, which has made this community way nicer community, very attractive to outsiders. And you clearly see it on every day. It doesn't matter if it's winter or summer. People are using this path in the mornings for jogging, or at night. At any daytime you can see people using it now. And I cannot really imagine how we got by without having that path. And any addition to making this path more convenient and having more people from the other neighborhoods being able to use this biking and pedestrian path would make this neighborhood way more valuable. And I'm sure a little investment here will increase our property values over time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have time for one more person because there was a cancellation. Who wants to speak?
Thank you. Stephen Clark, 7392 St. Ives Place in Westchester. I love the bike path. I've said that before. I would love to have more bike paths. I wish I could ride from here to Fountain Square on a bike path. This is not the way to do it. If we want a bike path, let's raise the funds. Let's do it locally. This has nothing to do with Glenn Becker or Welling or anything else. This is strictly a matter of finances. We're very casual about spending money that we don't have to be accountable for. And this sort of thing starts here, because every other community is out there saying the same thing that you're saying. Is, it's $150,000, it's 5 seconds in the budget, it's not a big deal. But all that adds up to a huge debt that we have. And we can either stand up on principle and say that we're not going to do this, or we are part of the problem. That's simply how it is. We have these people who this one fellow who showed up here 2 weeks ago, business owner, bicyclist. He came in here, he said he talked for 2 minutes, and boom, he was out the door. Never seen him before, don't even know if he's here again tonight. Spend $400,000, spend federal funds, and he's gone. And that's all the more concern he has about possibly the federal deficit and certainly spending here in Westchester. I'd like to thank Carl Ruhlman and Ann and some of the others who come here week after week after week, and they watch this stuff and they pay attention to the funds and the money, and they're engaged in this process, and I think they deserve credit for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that I was told that there were several people in the audience in favor of the bike path, but they have to leave at 6:30 because they have got the regular run schedule always on 6:30. In that case, may I get a head count on those who have to leave at 6:30 that cannot stay?
Are they expressing support for the path?
I count 25. 25. Thank you. These are in support of the bike path.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry.
Can I say something?
No.
We have another.
Yeah, we have another second part, citizens' comment at the end of the meeting. Okay. All right, let's move on to presentation, Mrs. Boyko.
How about hands against? Can we have a show of hands against the
Yeah,
bike
do we have
path?
hands against who are going to leave at 6:30?
How about just hands against the park?
Hands against the park.
Who
That's a
does
good
not
idea.
want the bike path?
1, 2,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5. Correct? Thank you. Mrs. Boyko, presentation. Item A.
Yes, Westchester Baseball Complex. The Westchester Baseball Partnership, which is the management and operating entity who uses and schedules and operates the Westchester Baseball Complex, would like to offer a proposal to the Board of Trustees requesting your consideration to establish a naming rights program for the baseball fields based on discussions that it's had with a potential sponsor. One of their principals of the baseball partnership is here this evening, Mr. Mark Dunaway. So he's going to take a couple minutes to explain and to present the proposal.
Mr. Dunaway.
Thank you. My name is Mark Dunaway. I represent Westchester Baseball Partnership. We are a group of 7 volunteers who operate and maintain Westchester Baseball Complex for the Township. We are beginning our 4th season. Friday we'll have our first games finally. It's warm enough and dry enough. And we'll have our first games Friday. In fact, we have a tournament this weekend with several out-of-town teams. Throughout our 4 years, or 3 years so far, starting our 4th, we have made a number of changes and improvements in the park. We continue to operate it and maintain it. And we have also faced a number of challenges. What I'd like to speak with tonight is a program that we'd like to put in place to help put the park on more solid financial footing, and a way that will help us do that. When we began to operate and maintain the park, the township gave us 3 goals. One is to support the competitive youth baseball interests within Westchester. We have over 40 teams who call WCBC their home fields. We host over 1,000 teams from around Cincinnati, in fact, throughout the Midwest over the course of a summer. So we are very focused on the needs of competitive youth baseball within Westchester. The second goal was to support Westchester's visitors industry. We schedule tournaments, specifically tournaments to attract out-of-town teams to stay in our hotels in the Union Center area and in Westchester, both at Cincinnati Dayton Road and up at Tylersville Road, as well as in the restaurants and shops around Westchester. We'll have 14 tournaments this year, which is consistent with what we've had year in and year out. And our third goal is to be financially self-sufficient, that the park operate purely from funds from the teams that use it and the organizations that run tournaments there. We also, in addition to youth teams and tournaments, we also have over 40 local businesses who have stepped forward to support the park and our young athletes by advertising at the park. So collectively, through those three means, we provide all the funds to operate and maintain the park, make improvements, and make our annual maintenance, as well as a payment to the township. Each year as well, we face a certain amount of uncertainty. Will teams come back? We are one of the nicest parks in and around the Cincinnati area to play baseball. We are also one of the most expensive, since all the funds come from playing at WCBC. Between the economy putting pressure on all of us, as well as competition from other tournament venues in and around Cincinnati that are larger, we continue to face challenges in maintaining the park and raising the funds each year. We'd like to expand our advertising program to help take away some of that financial uncertainty, and what we'd like to move forward with is a program for naming the fields. And let me describe a few things about what that program might include. We'd like to expand our advertising program to allow either a single business or multiple businesses to associate their name with a specific field or with the complex overall. This is a field naming program is modeled around field naming programs that have been used in other similar complexes in and around Cincinnati and within Ohio. An example of what this might look like is to refer to a field as Sponsor Field at Westchester Baseball Complex. We would install signage at WCBC that's consistent with signage that we currently have for our advertisers. That includes signs on our concessions building, signs on the fields, probably on the backstops, and a welcome sign at the inside gates. We would also like to install a sign on the back of one of the scoreboards to face Union Center Boulevard. The benefits that we would expect to get from a field naming program such as this is first and foremost to reduce some of the uncertainty around our financial self-sufficiency each year. It would put us on more solid financial footing so that we can meet our operating expenditures every year, our payment to the township. A second benefit is that it would help provide funds that we need to make end-of-year maintenance updates to the field to keep them up to spec. We have spent a fair amount of money over the last few years getting the fields back to the condition they were in when they were built, so we can maintain them in that condition for the youth of the township, as well as our guests who come to play out-of-town tournaments. This would help us make sure we have the funds to do that each year and protect that investment. Thirdly, we would like to eliminate the gate fee that we currently charge, especially for seniors. And that is our first target, is to try to eliminate that for seniors. We've received letters. I'm aware of the township having received some. I've been contacted by seniors asking for us to consider maybe a Golden Buckeye card or something like that, a program where the grandparents that come and watch their grandchildren play multiple games throughout the year wouldn't have to pay a gate fee, and we'd like to do that. We believe the benefits from having a field naming program would help us have the funds to afford to do that. But we need your help. Our agreement with the township precludes any signage outside of the park. And in order to install a sign on the back of one of our scoreboards to face Union Center Boulevard, we would need to get the permission of the township in order to do that. And that's what I'm here to ask for today, is for you to consider allowing us to put a well-proportioned sign that is consistent with the signage we have inside the park, facing outside the park. That will help increase the value of this program to prospective sponsors and would allow us to raise more money to achieve the goals and achieve the benefits for the park that we'd like to get from this program. Those are my prepared comments. I would entertain any questions that you have.
Thank you. As speaking as just one trustee, however, I think I speak for the board in that your goals are our goals. We want to see your plan successful. We want the fields to be successful. When you first took over the running of the fields, we were very pleased you signed a certain commitment to maintain the fields and also put some funds towards what we need to have to maintain a reserve in our funds to make sure that we'll be able to maintain these fields in the future or for whatever purpose future trustees. As it turns out, we have had to, over the years, fund quite a bit of the improvements, quite a bit of the repairs. We have had to reduce the amount of funds we are expecting you to put into our park fund. Is it your belief, and what backup do you have to give us confidence in your belief that this signage would help us overcome, the financial uncertainties we've had with the program?
Okay. We've had some initial discussions. We've approached several of the companies who currently advertise with us about the notion of having a field maintenance program and expanding the advertising. We've had some initial discussions about what that might be worth to a local business to be able to put their name on a field. And when we look at that collectively, we believe that provides collectively enough funds to address some of the issues that we face. I don't have final numbers because we don't have a final agreement, but it is a significant enough amount to make a difference in what we have available for end-of-year maintenance, as well as the uncertainty of year-to-year operating, as well as be able to take steps forward, taking things off the table, such as gate fees for seniors that we had to put on the table initially just to make ends meet. And so, based on the numbers that we've had in our initial discussions, we believe that provides sufficient funding to address those needs.
Mrs. Boyko, within the strictures of the contract we have, is this allowable, or does this require us to rewrite the contract that we have with the Westchester Baseball Partners?
There would be 3 filters, I guess, that the Board of Trustees would need to consider in rendering direction on this particular agenda item. One would be, of course, the National Park Service. This property was deeded and is governed by the National Park Service because of its restrictions and from the Voice of America. Secondly would be the lease agreement, and then thirdly would be any zoning requirements or restrictions. We have, based on what Mr. Dunaway has presented previously to me and then also this evening, I believe that each filter can be achieved based on the proposal. Should the board endeavor to authorize this naming rights proposal and allow for a sign to be displayed from Union Center, or visible from Union Center Boulevard, we certainly can come back with conditions or expectations of how that signage can be displayed, and the board could then direct based on those expectations. It may be wise to wait for any lengthy discussion until Trustee Lang is in attendance. He did actually the proposal came through Trustee Lang to me. Mr. Dunaway presented it first to Trustee Lang, and then Trustee Lang presented it to me. So he is aware of the proposal and is familiar with the proposal. However, in order to capture the full board's direction, you may want to wait for any lengthy discussion until his attendance.
I do have a question. How long is this lease agreement?
For ourselves or for the program?
For this field naming?
Typically, what we've seen in looking at other similar programs, 3 to 5 years with options beyond that. We would intend to set it up so that the program stays with the park, not necessarily with us. So our agreement with the Township is 5 years long, with, I believe, options after that. I haven't read it in a while, but it's 5 years long with options after. But we would want it to stay with the park, not necessarily with us. So if in 5 years or future years we're not running the park, whoever is running the park still gets benefit from that, and it stays with the park. That's the intent, is for it to go to the park.
So do you believe that one of the things we could discuss would be, for example, if the board decided to go forward with this in some form, that the revenue from the signage perhaps could go directly to the park fund and relieve the Westchester Baseball Partners from having to make that contributions to the fund?
For a portion of it, we certainly
could. And put all your funding into maintaining the fields?
We certainly could look at that. yes, as a way to have the payment come out of this funds as opposed to through us to the township, yes, that's something we could do. I think that I'd have to look at how that would affect some of the things we wanted to do at the park, but yes, that's something we could discuss.
Yeah, I think clearly there are a lot of things we could discuss. We would certainly want to have Mr. Lang on the board.
We'll get to the details.
Okay.
All right.
But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Boyko, item B.
We do have a proclamation where we'd like to acknowledge the Telecommunicators Week, which is coming up on April 14th through the 20th. I would like to invite one of our communications supervisors, Mr. Dan Lutz, and also our operations manager of the Communications Center, Mr. Dennis Dick, to the podium, if that's okay?
Yes.
Okay. Take your time while everybody leaves.
Noted.
Each year around this time, the Board of Trustees and the Fiscal Officer acknowledges and appreciates the efforts of the Westchester Emergency Communications. I'd like to take a moment just to identify that it's not just once a year that you all revere the service that these gentlemen and ladies contribute to our community, notwithstanding the reverence for the police and fire, but oftentimes they are considered the first responders. And they are the first responders actually to an incident or to a scene. However, I also like to consider our emergency communications, our dispatchers, as also first responders because they are the entity that receives the initial call for an emergency, then dispatching that response. And just the time I spend in the communication center listening to some of the calls that they have to receive, handle, and then dispatch appropriate resources and personnel. It's a very eye-opening, very challenging position that these men and women face. So I really want to acknowledge that and the effort that they make every day for us, our community, and for the trustees. Additionally, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, Trustees Wong, Stoker, and in his absence, Trustee Lang, and also our Fiscal Officer, Mr. Bruce Jones, I'd like to present this proclamation where we are acknowledging and appreciating and revering the week of April 14th through the 20th as Telecommunicators Week. And Dennis and Dan, I won't say any more, so I'm sure you have things you'd like to share.
I share similar thoughts as the administrator as far as being the operations manager of our communications center. I may be biased, but of course I believe that our staff is top-notch, can't be matched by any other communication center. And it's just with great pride that I get to work with them and lead that department, and think that they do an excellent job, and would like to express appreciation to the board for their recognition through this proclamation.
Thank you. You know, your abilities,
Is Dan going to say a few words?
No, I just, on behalf of my fellow communication officers, I'd just like to thank you for the recognition. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. You know, you are the very first person that somebody talks to who's calling because they have chest pains or been in a bad car accident or who knows whatever emergency is happening. And it is your excellence in the performance of your duties, your calm professionalism, which can make the difference between saving lives. You are a critical part of our emergency services that we provide. So it's with very great pleasure that we are able to give a thank you to all of you, and I hope you'll extend our best wishes to the whole crew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move to item C, action items. I will entertain a motion to approve trustee meeting minutes, March 12, 2013.
I'll make a motion for discussion purposes.
I'll second.
I apologize for getting my changes so late to everybody. I think I sent them out this morning. Perhaps we ought to wait until we know if Mr. Lang's had an opportunity to look at them. There were a few things, if maybe we could resolve at this point. Skipping over things like spelling or whatnot. On page 4, we had a paragraph that started out, this agenda item was introduced by Mrs. Boyko, but it didn't say what the agenda item was, so I took the liberty of adding to it for, if the rest of the board would approve the change, adding to the front of that paragraph. Mrs. Boyko then introduced the request by the Board of County Commissioners.
I think this
for
is something
an
you sent out
easement
earlier this
BOA.
afternoon. I haven't received it as yet,
Yeah.
but I can incorporate that in whatever else you have,
Yeah,
and we can go over it in 2 weeks.
yeah.
But I should
there-
point out, so that you know, the March 26 minutes just turned over to staff, and you know the practice is that once I'm done with them, I turn them over to staff. 3 members of staff review them, turn them back to me, then I forward them on to you. So those ought to be forwarded to you in 2-3 days, I might guess. And as far as the minutes for this evening, depending on how many people speak this evening, I would potentially, you'll receive those before the end of this week, I might guess at the beginning of next week. So just so you get a sense of what's going to be on the next agenda.
If I could continue, you had a couple places where you were talking about, for example, you mentioned Mrs. Stoker had no comments. Actually, I did. They were there under the trustee comments period, so I struck that. And then I changed the reference to my colleague from Mrs. Wong to Mr. Wong. But
Okay.
I'm sure we can, after everybody's had a chance to review them, maybe consider them at the next meeting when Mr. Lang can join us.
Sure.
Agree. Let's move
That's
on.
all right with you?
Yeah. Move on to item D. I entertain a motion to approve payments of bills.
Also move.
Second it. Discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
And Mrs. Boyko, requisition greater than $2,500.
We have one for the board's consideration. You may recall at your December 4th, 2012 meeting, the board approved a 5-year software and services agreement running from December 31st of 2012 through December 30th of 2017. Because for budgeting purposes, we did split that payment into that subscription fee into 2 payments, one of which was paid at the December 14th meeting upon your approval of the agreement, and then with needing to make the second installment or payment and final payment sometime in the second quarter of the following year. So this is an already approved agreement and subscription for a software maintenance and support services for Cartograph, which is the software package that is the backbone of our infrastructure and work order development that's engaged by our maintenance division. So for the board's consideration to Cartograph in the amount of $72,947.25, remit final payment for a previously approved 5-year software subscription, maintenance, and support services.
I will entertain a motion for item 1.
Also move.
I'll second it.
Yeah,
Dis-
this was a giant leap forward some years back in being able to bring technology into the maintenance of our infrastructure. This was, I think, a period of at least a year, if not more, mapping every drain, every road, every culvert, so that we could put our maintenance of all these structures on a predictable schedule, so that we could be sure that we would have the assets we needed when we needed them to be able to bring proper maintenance to all this, really one of our most essential and most important services that we provide the township.
Roll call. Mr. Jones.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Item 2, Mrs. Boyko, personnel item.
Consistent with what has been determined most efficient operations, at your last meeting, March 26th, the board did approve the complement of hiring 12 seasonal positions within the Community Services Department. This is the first actual hire of several of those employees. As you are aware, we receive a complement to hire, and then we bring to you as applicants are identified, and we bring them to you for your subsequent hiring. They are, again, because of the nature of this type of position, it is very transient. We need to ensure that the qualified applicant is put to work almost immediately as possible. So this is to hire 3 April through October seasonal employees. Mr. Jason Schroeder in the Union Center Boulevard Landscape District, Mr. Jason Nociro assigned to the Cemetery Division. Those 2 hires are effective April 9th, 2013. And Mr. Brian Newman, assigned to the Parks, would be effective April 15th, 2013, all at the hourly rate of $11.25 per hour.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion for item 2.
I move that we hire 3 seasonal employees as described by Mrs. Boyka.
I'll second it. Discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Item 3.
Annually, the Board of Trustees honors volunteers who have served township committees, boards, or various different functions during the previous year. And we'd like to present for the board's consideration a date to conduct the Westchester Volunteer Appreciation Reception. The proposed and suggested date is May 16th, 2013, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. We'd like to hold the reception at the Mulhauser Barn because in previous years that location, that facility, tends to gain the most attendance. And so we feel it's a wonderful opportunity to have as many attend as possible.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion for item 3.
Also move that we set the date for the Westchester Volunteer Appreciation Reception on May 16th from 5:30 to 7 o'clock at the Mulhauser Barn.
I'll second it. Discussion?
You know, this is a community where many residents give enormous amounts of time. There are many years when I have been able to count more volunteers working for the township on township projects and township committees than we have employees. That's how many volunteers we have, from senior vans to rascals to our zoning committees to BZA. It's just heartwarming to know how many people in this community care so much about this community that they give so much of their time to it. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to say thank you to them.
We shouldn't take them for granted. They
No.
put in a lot of times, volunteer, and that's what makes our community great. Roll call?
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Item 4.
On the occasions of March 12th and March 26th at your 2013 meetings, staff presented and the board did discuss the OKI Transportation Alternative Program, the TAP program, and its application to the Smith Road Connector. We have scheduled this as an agenda item because at least the majority of the board did direct staff to complete the application and to prepare it for submittal for its April 12th deadline, which is this Friday. So I'm not sure what details or further details the board would like me to address. However, the grant application was completed and was provided to as part of your electronic packages. The grant eligible projects for this particular grant include bicycle and pedestrian facilities, traffic calming and environmental measures, and environmental measures related to road projects. The costs include right-of-way and construction, while preliminary engineering, environmental, and contract plans are not eligible and are the responsibility of the local jurisdiction. The County Engineer's Office has agreed to design and develop the construction drawings for this project, and the maximum allowable grant is $500,000 with a minimum of a 20% local match. The application has been prepared as a 20% local match, and just awaits. I'd be pleased to answer any questions regarding the application and its completion, but really the staff is just awaiting direction from the board on whether or not to submit this for its deadline of this Friday.
Okay, I will entertain a motion for item 4.
I'll entertain a motion then to approve the application for the grant for purposes of discussion.
I'll second. Discussion?
There's been a lot of discussion about both the bike path, but particularly about the grant for federal funds to help build it. And first I'd like to say that I think it's gratifying that so many citizens have come down, whether they supported the bike path or not, whether they supported getting a federal grant or not. Having citizen participation is a mark to me of a vibrant community. And once again, we've proved that this is a community where people really care about what's happening. Citizen participation at all levels is a good thing. Now, the discussion tonight is not whether or not to build a bike path, it's whether or not to apply for this federal grant through OKI, since that issue requires a timely decision. I am hoping that we can have a spirited discussion later on whether or not to actually build the bike path. Mr. Lang has already let us know that, in his opinion, he does not want to apply for the federal grant. So it's up to us to discuss whether or not, in our opinion, we should apply for it. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I was one of the 3 trustees who unanimously voted to accept and support our connections plan. The connections plan was, and I think we have a couple of our members out in the audience now, the connections plan was put together after a very long and involved and dedicated group of our residents studied for, I'm sure it was better than a year. It had to have been 2 years. Looking at not only the number of bike paths that we, the Township trustee, had built, but also the number of bike paths which were available through private neighborhoods, the bike paths that adjoined our communities. And they did an analysis and came up with a connections plan, which, if implemented, they believed would help connect people in places. And with an added interest in evaluating those parts of the plan which could give us the most bang for the buck. In other words, where the township could connect existing bike paths, as in the case of this proposed bike path connector that we will be considering when Mr. Lang comes back. Now, some of our residents have felt that we should not accept federal money, as our federal government's already so desperately in debt, and they didn't want to have Westchester be a part of adding additional debt onto our future generations. Some of our residents have said that building bike paths or accepting federal money was somehow aiding and abetting a United Nations Agenda 21 program. Frankly, the fact that the federal government has already provided or allocated those funds to OKI means the horse is out of that barn as far as it being spent. With respect to whether or not the United Nations is trying to control what happens in Westchester, frankly, this is just a bike path. It has nothing to do with the United Nations. And as I said in previous meetings, things like bike paths and sidewalks have been built around the world by communities for over 4,000 years. They're going to continue to be built long after everybody's forgotten what happened to the United Nations. And I can assure you, on the part of this particular trustee, my decision will not be based on anything the United Nations is doing or thinking of doing. Some of the federal gasoline taxes that each of us pays comes back to our state. One of the ways it comes back to our state is some of it goes to the Ohio Department of Transportation, and it helps maintain our interstate highway system. Some of it comes to organizations like OKI, which stands for the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Council of Governments. Each of us communities in our particular area has a spokesperson who votes on that with respect to what projects OKI should take on, what they should fund, how they should approach the projects they're considered in. I was the spokesperson last year. Mr. Lang is the spokesperson this year for our community on OKI. OKI, for example, was a conduit by which we received, the county engineer received federal funds to widen Tylersville Road, also to widen Bypass 4. In spite of the fact that that I don't particularly agree with, say, some of the disagreements of people with respect to funding here, I do have to say that applying for an OKI grant funding does have some issues which weren't raised at the time. One of them is the fact that if we use grant funding, this project could be delayed at least 1 year, if not 2. It's quite possibly wouldn't be built till July of 2015. So if we want to build a bike path and want to do it expeditiously so people can start enjoying it, maybe federal grant money is not the way to go for that reason. It delays the project. Additionally, selecting or accepting federal money brings in the constraints of the federal government. It gives us another layer of mandates that we believe could add perhaps as much as another 15% to the cost of the project. And just as somebody who likes to save money, that is not, I think, a plus for the project, for this type of funding for this project. That doesn't mean that I would say no to all federal funding projects. There are times when it seems to make sense. I'm not sure that it does at this time. In summary, the past years have shown that we cannot, as a township, rely on either state or federal funding for our general revenues or to fund our services. We have to be very careful that we never build anything we cannot maintain ourselves. We cannot build anything for which we would rely on state or federal funding to maintain it. As long as I've been a trustee, which is about 20 years, Westchester always has and must continue to strive to be financially self-sufficient. We've limited our size of government. We are constantly seeking ways to reorganize, to improve, to rethink, to reconstruct the services we provide to our taxpayers and to our residents. We have developed sustainable financial structures to ensure that those services that we provide, whether it's our roads, our emergency services, our senior van transportation service, our park amenities, our concert series, to make sure that they can exist on their own, that we aren't relying on some outside funding, that our funding is coming right here locally. Because we can't trust that funding coming from the state or the federal government would be there next year, much less next decade. From my perspective, the negatives of federal funding for the Smith Road connector clearly outweigh the positives. And therefore, I recommend, frankly, we don't apply for this grant. Now, I'm not saying that about the bike path. I've been supported bike path where it is supported by the citizens. But
Okay.
in this case, for purposes of considering this grant.
I agree. Let me say a few words, since Mr. Lane have fired all his cannonballs already. Yes, I heard a few residents think that it is physically irresponsible to use federal grant to build bike path in the township. They even said that it is immoral and shameful to use federal grant. Now, I want to ask, what is immoral? Is it immoral to keep our children healthy? Is it a shame? Immoral to keep our environment clean? And I also heard that it is a burden to our children if we accept this grant. It's unnecessary debt. And then the federal government always has strings attached to it. And furthermore, in UN Agenda 21, one guy alluded to it, that it will infringe upon the sovereignty of the United States and turn our country into Marxist or communism. I think it is this UN Agenda 21 and federal debt. It is not within the scope of township trustees. It is your U.S. congressman, representative. I strongly encourage our residents to talk to our congressman. And there is one right in our township. There are many, yes, that's correct. There are many funding sources to build a bike path. Of course, the best one on top is federal grant, because with these limited resources lately, they pay 80%, we pay match it with 20%. Second is TIF, tax incentive funding. Third is general fund, or road, and fourth, road fund. Fifth, we have connections fund. And finally, the one that everyone hates most is tax levy for the bike path. No one wants that, including me. I really like to move forward with this project. And perhaps we can discuss afterwards. But for the sake of this motion, let's vote on it. Roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
No.
Let's move on to item 5.
Then just point of order, Mr. President, that because there are only 2 trustees present and there is not a majority of you two to move forward, then staff...
I think the motion dies, doesn't it?
Well, no, the action was taken. It doesn't die. It's just that then there's no direction for staff to apply for this grant. So this grant will not be, for which will not be applied.
I think Mr. Lang was very clear about how he didn't want to move forward. So
well, regardless, the vote this evening is 1-1, so there's no majority. Regardless, I can only go by who voted.
There's no direction to move forward, certainly.
Yeah, correct. That's what
And
so I just want to make sure that's
we're
clear.
all in agreement that Mr. Lang does not want to move forward on this grant application.
I understand, but that's not germane to the vote this evening. So the vote is 1-1, so there's no majority.
No direction to move forward.
Right, with the current members that voted.
Correct. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure.
Okay.
So we will not be applying for this grant.
Item 5.
Oh, thank you. This is a police item that is requesting the board's consideration to apply for the U.S. Department of Justice Bulletproof Vest Grant, and if awarded, to authorize the Township Administrator to accept this grant. This grant is, if approved and accepted, the program will reimburse the Township 50% of our costs for new or replacement of expired bulletproof vests. There is no local match required. We have been awarded funding previously at the 50% reimbursement level, and just the police chief is requesting the board's consideration to apply, and if granted, or excuse me, if awarded, to authorize the administrator to accept the grant.
Okay. I will entertain a motion for item 5.
Also move that we apply for the 2013 U.S. Department of Justice Bulletproof Vest Grant.
A second. Discussion.
Yeah, this is something that we have to buy to protect our police officers on the job. It's something that wears out. What's the average lifespan? Is it 5 years or less of your average bulletproof vest? So they all have to be on a regular schedule replaced. This is an opportunity for us to use Department of Justice funding to provide something that our police officers need. So I have no problem supporting this.
Well, it's also a federal grant. Roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Item 6.
The next item is also a grant administered or to apply for the 2014 Ohio Traffic Safety Office High Visibility Enforcement Overtime Grant. This grant is running on fiscal year 2014 and is dispersed by the state. This would be a reimbursement for overtime costs for any traffic enforcement or safety enforcement of high visibility areas. There is no match again. We have been awarded funding in fiscal year 2011 and 2013, and significant costs in the amount of about $50,000 in the current year, and about $43,000 awarded fiscal year 2011. So requesting the board's consideration to apply for the 2014 Ohio Traffic Safety Office Highway Visibility Enforcement Overtime Grant, and again, if awarded, authorize the administrator to accept the grant.
I will entertain a motion for item 6.
Okay, I make a motion then to apply for the 2014 Ohio Traffic Safety Office High Visibility Enforcement Overtime Grant as described by Mrs. Boyko.
Second. Discussion.
Again, this is something which helps us keep our community safe. I have no problem supporting it.
Okay. This is all for the safety of the public, just like a bike path. Roll call.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Okay, now we come to citizens' comment, second part.
Mrs. Stoker, thank you very much for your vote.
Will you please state your name and address?
I'm sorry. I thought everybody knew who it was by now. Stephen Clark, 7392 St. Ives Place here in Westchester. Thank you for your vote, Mrs. Stoker. The vest for the police. If our police department needs vests, I don't know why we're waiting for a grant. I'm sure we ought to be able to find the money somewhere to accomplish that. I heard your little comment off the side there that it was a federal program. I would not accept federal money for police vests. Let's pay for them. Let's do it now. Let's not file for a grant and wait 6 months or a year or wait for the feds. We should be doing these things without the feds' help. We should be independent of that. I would suggest maybe if we had not harassed the Liberty tax guy up there on Tylersville Road, we might have money for their vests now. And I would urge you to consider settling that lawsuit and getting out from underneath that before it costs us another $100,000 that it's cost us so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
I'm Carl Ruhlman, 8285 Ventel Drive. To begin with, I will state, because I think it's important, that nothing I'm going to say today will be critical of the performance or competency of our township administrative staff and township employees. My comments apply only to those holding elected positions, not those who have chosen public administration as a profession. There's another subject to mention about the proceedings of the March 26th meeting of the Board of Trustees. In my opinion, the decorum of everyone there was outstanding. The arguments on both sides of issues were polite and respectful. Professionalism displayed by all. Westchester and America at their exceptional best. We hear about core competencies, the basic responsibilities of governmental units at their respective size or jurisdiction. Acknowledged core competencies of the Westchester government include township roads, public safety through police and fire departments, and stormwater management. These are the most frequently mentioned in conversation or in presentations on the subject. And since we're a home rule township under Ohio law, I suppose we must add zoning regulation as a responsibility. But do we consider it a core competency? There are also economic development activities which we pay employees to perform. One could expand on the question of whether it ranks as a core responsibility that citizens rely heavily on, but not today. What I want to discuss is another competency that citizens expect, but may not consider it core. It is a basic responsibility of public servants who occasionally consider themselves public officials. We hear how well Westchester is doing compared to other townships and compared to municipalities. That means cities for those in Rio Linda. It's certainly true that Westchester is blessed. Yes, how well township employees do their job is a factor. And I believe our paid employees do their jobs well, that which they are told to do. And they are well paid. But do our trustees do their job well? They continually tell us they do. One even says they have worked assiduously in this task, pointing to township growth, lower unemployment, and other things that we in Westchester enjoy. You can read trustee bios on the township website to see in what light they see themselves. But I can't help but point out that Westchester's success as a place to live and work is actually due to three factors that our current township trustees have had little to do with. They are, 1, its location astride Interstate 75, a major national highway corridor with 4 exits serving our township. 2, the vision of a number of private citizens who saw the development potential here and invested in the ideas and opportunities. And 3, the absence of an income tax, an advantage derived from retaining our township form of government under Ohio law. One might also say that the well-regarded Lakota school system draws people to live here and enjoy the other advantages. You spoke at the last meeting defending the concept of more bike or hiking paths, extolling the use of local funds initiated by citizens groups to create some existing bike paths. You take pride in the bike path along Beckett Ridge Boulevard, but it was privately funded. Now a group of citizens speaks out against a bike path project utilizing federal funds, which increase the debt of our children and grandchildren, and you have seemed to just charge right ahead, ignoring the fact that bikers and hikers are a special interest group, and at least one of you is a member. As a biker, you want all taxpayers, even those in Fargo and Atlanta, to pay for a bike path for you. You speak of the Connections Fund. It's a source of funds, as I understand it, is payments from recyclers that you, as trustees, have designated to be used for bike paths, etc. I want you to know that I unfailingly recycle all my paper, metal, plastic bottles, aluminum cans as appropriate. So my efforts have contributed to this fund. You should also know that I don't want my share used for this purpose, but instead placed in a general fund to benefit all the citizens. I began this evening by talking about core competencies. It's my firm belief that township core competencies should include one big one, and that is leaving citizens alone with as little interruption or intervention by government as possible. I don't think you're really competent in this area. If someone wants to dress up in a costume and hype his business, what's wrong with that? If someone wants to park his truck on his own property, why not? If someone wants to plant a garden on his property near the street, what's the harm? If you let the grass grow tall at Beckett Park, then why can't a homeowner let his grass grow tall? If government or entities with easements can let equipment around the township become unsightly without maintenance, why cite only citizens for such an infraction? And if the man wants to put a sign on his scoreboard, let him do it. I get excited. Successful administrations at all levels perform best when those elected serve for a short time and then go home. It is far too easy for you to interpret your inferred or implied status or importance and do things you want instead of what is needed. It becomes too easy to spend other people's money when you discover you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, I have a few comments. So, my name is Frank Parsons, 8523 Deer Path. So it's been a little while since I've been here to visit, and the same trustees are still here, which I'm pleased to see. A number of years ago, my wife and I worked on the Connections Committee and established some of the game plans that I see enacted today. And at the time when we started that committee, we were given previous design committee's plans that was fairly extensive and it looked very expensive to implement. And the charter we had for that committee was look for useful things for citizens that were not going to cost a lot, and then have the township adopt that, and when the opportunity arose, adopt it for the citizens. And I'm pleased to say that I've seen that enacted. I've seen the plans that we had back then come into being, and I see people use these things. Many of the trails that you've installed, we travel frequently ourselves. And Port Union Trail is a bit of an orphan in that it's not connected. But even so, when we first got here, it was not used that much. But now when we go there, we always see people on that trail. And so it's gaining use. I got to say that the Beckett Park, in my opinion, is a huge success. I saw hockey players out playing this winter. It was very nice to see. The playground is getting used. I see the soccer complex get used for training, and obviously the baseball park. So all these things I see that you do are getting used by citizens. The citizens do use them. They do appreciate them. My wife and I use them. You still have work to do, in our opinion. East to west connections still do not work. The subject of your current debate, the connection there in Smith Road, there were two people who were very vocal that they wanted this 4 years ago, and they said that they were stranded off on the western fringe. This connection would help them. It would get them into the Union Center area. Likewise, the folks on the east, there were many people that showed up back then. They don't have any good path to get to Union Center. And that's a tougher nut to crack, but I think if you keep seeking opportunities when it's convenient to do it during other normal business, I encourage you to try to accomplish that. I recognize that this is a local place. The trustees work locally here. You don't deal with federal issues. And I like Ms. Stoker's comments that the horse is out of the barn on that money, and I think it is a failure on the trustees' part not to get that money. I don't like spending my local money for this. I've already paid my federal taxes, and I get very little of those federal taxes back. And if you see a chance to get me my money back, please do it. I'm disappointed. So, but overall, I have to say you've made great improvements to the township. I see it every day, and keep it up. That's my message to you. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Parson. Next gentleman.
I'm Dick Chartier, a new business owner at 8781 Cincinnati Dayton Road. And I'm actually really good to hear that, I heard two objections to today's grant for the bike path. The first of which I heard was that we were concerned that if we applied for the federal grant, it would delay the bike project. So I'm excited to hear, and I expect that you will help push that bike path sooner than perhaps as late as 2015 if we would have gone for a grant proposal. So I'm excited to hear that because I believe the path will be great for the community. This particular bike path I'm really encouraged with that because it transforms a bike path that is primarily used for recreation and transforms it into bicycles as transportation. And that's where the community can reap huge benefits. Bike paths have a cost-to-benefit ratio of approximately 5 to 1. Riders cost the state and localities less than drivers by reducing congestion and wear and tear on roads. Homes closer to the bike paths are also more valuable. Riders produce fewer emissions. In fact, every mile traveled by a bike in lieu of a car in transportation reduces CO2 emissions a pound per mile. It also helps to reduce healthcare costs through physical fitness. In fact, for every 2 miles traveled by bike in lieu of a car, it saves society $1. 2 miles saves $1. That's dollars directly to our community and the society at large. One of the other objections I heard today was that there's a small percent increase in extra dollars. In fact, that's exactly what our economy needs today for recovery, for long-term debt reduction, is to spend money on infrastructure. that small percentage increase that the beds would require isn't just lost. It just doesn't just appear. That money is spent. That money will improve our recovery. Recovery improvement will reduce our long-term debt. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next.
My name's Maureen Parsons. I live at 8523 Deer Path, Westchester. We've lived here for 24 years. I am a member of the Connections Committee, and our committee had worked for 2 to 3 years looking at the entire Westchester area, trying to find the connections that are already out there, sidewalks, bike trails, and making it so that people could get from one place to another without the means of a vehicle, without the means of a car. You could get out there and you could walk, you could use a bicycle, you could run. So this map that we produced and that was accepted by the Township shows different places, and one of the things that we were very highly concerned with was the funding that's available out there, because everybody is very concerned. There's not very many dollars available, so what we wanted to do was get the best bang for the buck, and we were able to do that on a number of different trails that have been built, and it is a pure joy to me every time I am anywhere near the bike trails that have been built to see how much they're used. They're used by people walking their dogs, they're used by runners, they're used by children walking to school. They're just used all the time. They're used in the winter. Whenever all this snow that we've had, you go out there and people have run down and worn down the trail to where it's black whenever we've had upwards of a foot of snow out there. So these things are used, and they're used by the community. The people like to talk about core competencies, and one of the main core competencies is to provide a safe community and safe transportation. Too many times, people think transportation has to come in 4 wheels. It never started as 4 wheels. It started on 2 legs to begin with. And that is what, as our Connections Committee was very, very concerned with, making sure that our map was not just prone for bikes, but as a connection for all kinds of transportation, for people that wanted to do it, to get from their homes to the library, from their homes to a school, from their homes to the grocery store. Wherever they wanted to get to, they had a way of getting there without having to get into a vehicle, into a car. So the proposed trail that was talked about today was one of the what is a perfect example of a big bang for the buck. It connects a huge thousands of people to the east side of the trail with the business community along 747. I myself have walked down there many, many times from our house to Kroger's and picked up groceries. I end up having to walk through ditches, or it's very unsafe right along the road. The cars have to veer around you. So it's an extremely unsafe condition as it is right now. That was one of the core competencies of government, is to provide a safe route for me to go so that I can get to Kroger's. Now, on the other side of the 747, you've got another more than 1,000 people that live in beautiful communities over there that right now cannot get to the library, get to the high school, get to the businesses at Union Center, because there's this short little section that's missing. And if you've ever been out there, if you've ever walked it, if you've ever seen it, you could see, I've got nice trails on the east side, I've got nice trails on the west side, but right here in the middle, I've got this section that's missing that was a big bang for the buck to connect there. There are economic benefits to these connections. The National Association of Home Builders In 2008, and one of their studies that they put out said that trails consistently remain the number one community amenity sought by prospective homeowners. Bike trails and sidewalks, connections is the number one thing people are looking for whenever they're going to buy a house. And what that does, that increases the property values in that community. That increases the community value. Health benefits. Every $1 in investment in trails leads to $3 in direct medical benefits. Investments in bike facilities improve the safety of the transportation system for all users and also benefits health, fitness, quality of life, and the environment. And hopefully I can help and find other funding to get this trail built. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Dennis Bender. It's 8227 Benttree Drive. I've been in Westchester now for 20 years. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed in the outcome of this vote. My main reason is you had the opportunity to apply for the grant. And when and if it did come about and we had the funding, you could have turned the grant down. So you've put yourself on a one-way street. Now, the way I'm reading Mrs. Stoker is you're intending to find money to do this path. That's the way I'm reading it. So I hope I am correct in that. My last comment is Mr. Lang made the statement, and you can go back and look, to the effect that Westchester has more paths than anybody else. And he quoted the Inquirer. I cannot find that article, and I would appreciate it with his help of finding it. I talked to a friend of mine that's an editor at the Inquirer, and they said they could not find it. The caveat was with the move to Columbus, it's somewhere in the shuffle. So I'm just putting it in the record. I'd like to see that article out of curiosity. Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Anyone else? Thank you. Let's move on to discussion items and trustee comments. Mrs. Boyko?
I have no discussion items for the board's consideration.
In light of there's a majority out here that spoke to me, that come to the meeting, that want this bike path. I think I would like to find an alternative source, funding source for this, which is the second best is TIF funding. Mrs. Boyko, do we have that area is 747 TIF. Do we have enough funds to cover this project?
The state enabling legislation and the enabling legislation that the Board of Trustees drafted and approved, for the 747 TIF, 1997, does permit, this would be a multi-purpose path, would be an infrastructure improvement, a public improvement that is eligible for TIF funding. So to answer a question, does the State Route 747 TIF fund have available resources to construct and pay for
Correct.
this type of infrastructure? Yes, it does.
Would it put a stress to the TIF funding?
I'm going by recollection. I think the TIF, 747 TIF fund has several $1 million in it, so I cannot anticipate that this would, depending on the construction project, if it falls in line with what has been estimated by the county engineer's office, would not be strain or deplete that current fund.
I'd really like to see that we move forward with this project. And I would like to discuss this with Mrs. Stoker, if you would consider using this TIF funding, because like I say, I have been out there. I've seen people with strollers walking, using our bike path, young folks holding hands, old folks Even one of them have wheelchairs. Just this weekend, and it is put to good use. And I also have people handed me letters to ask me if I could read it. I just want to read one that's try to paraphrase it. He said, "We live in the villages of Providence Subdivision, which is located at the end of Smith Road and across from the Endeavor Elementary. I have a young family and try to teach them that exercise is a key into a healthy lifestyle. So currently we walk around our 3-mile subdivision path, but would love to be able to extend that elsewhere now that my child is riding a bike. It would be terrific if we could ride our bikes up to 747 safely, because as you know, the path ends before the office complex. Then you have to try to walk along the burn, which I have seen others almost get hit by cars as they do so. Then as we are able to accomplish those feats, eventually be able to make it all the way to Beckett Park and Morehouse Barn. Right now, the only choice I have is to load everyone up in the car to go to Beckett Park, which is troublesome on many occasions, so we don't get there as much as we would like. I think both safety and connecting neighborhoods is an excellent idea, as well as bike path throughout Westchester Township." Signed by Kerry Steckman, Steckman, 8207 C Mist Court, Westchester, Ohio 45069. They are, to me, are still, majority of the people see this. This about half-mile of bike path is still a vital link between these two big subdivisions. There are thousands of residents on both sides. That this is the missing link, that people can walk to school, walk to church, walk to shopping area, Kroger. This is all for the safety of our community, safety of our residents. To walk on the side, shoulder of the road, it is dangerous. And I cannot stress the importance of safety in this part. And this bike path has many good amenities, provides many good amenities for our township.
I can see you're very passionate supporter of bike paths and of helping families not be forced to get in a car every time they want to go someplace safely. We also received a letter from the Beckett Ridge Homeowners Association addressed to Mr. Jungling, the director of our Community Development Department, saying, "Please accept this letter as a statement of preliminary support from the Beckett Ridge Board of Trustees for the proposed multi-purpose path along Smith Road between Beckett Ridge Boulevard and the path at Beckett Office Park." I think this is something that we certainly need to talk about and discuss when Mr. Lang is here. I know he is not particularly in support of it. He deserves the opportunity to be on the record with his concerns. One thing, if I could add about TIF funding, tax increment financing is a form of financing that we have used quite successfully for some years, wherein certain geographical areas in our community which are designated as tax increment financing districts, or TIFs, collect payments in lieu of taxes from the new commercial development within those districts. So TIF funding is not funding from the residents, it is funding from new commercial development within the tax increment financing districts. We have several. The 747 TIF is one that's located in this area, and Mr. Wong referred to it and asked about it because TIF funding is one of those things, if we were to go forward, would be considered as a possible funding source. And so he was asking if there is indeed adequate funding available in it for this kind of project.
I would consider, can we move this project within this year?
I think first we should discuss it and vote on it when Mr. Lang comes.
Correct.
And in the meantime, you might want to, the board could direct Mrs. Boyko to get some additional information with respect to when it could be done.
Yes.
And I know they're working on the cost, which I'm very much interested in seeing, because we don't have all the information we need, like do we have to use asphalt in some areas? Do we have to use concrete in some areas? How much is optional? I mean, if we use asphalt, that's cheaper to put in, but it's more costly to maintain it. As opposed to concrete, if we put concrete in, its maintenance is extremely low, but it costs more to put that in. But there might be some areas which dictate a particular, that all affects the cost and the maintenance costs. And I think staff is working on that at this time, so we could make a...
No, we're not working on that. The only cost projections that we presented and have been working on are the preliminary engineering based on the engineer's office assessments. So I think these are details that perhaps once the board has, the full board has...
Waiting for direction from the board as to whether or not we go forward on the project.
Once the full board has discussed, and then if those are, that's the direction of the majority, then we certainly would endeavor to do that. But we do not have those types of exact costs or materials and what would be used where and what's required where. Those are all things that would need to be done.
I may not have been clear in saying that this is something that we need to work on that we don't have yet, but has to be determined. The other concern, which we haven't brought up lately, which is important to me, and that is, do the property owners affected support this path if we go forth? We have had occasions where we have offered to put in bike paths, for example, along the News 42 corridor with the new improvements there. We were interested in adding some sidewalks along Dimmick to help residents get to the 42 businesses so they could use them. But the residents whose property would be affected said no, they didn't want a sidewalk. So we listened to them. We said fine. We saved $750,000, give or take a couple of bucks. I don't think this board has any interest of shoving bike paths or sidewalks down the throats of the community. We are looking for ways to help the community grow and develop in the way that the community clearly indicates it wants to go. I frankly have heard a lot of people, and far more people in support of the bike path, but we still have more information to get. We still need to make a decision. We need to wait for Mr. Lang, in my opinion, to come back so we can discuss it as a full board, because Mr. Lang is going to be want to be on the record for his
of course. But we do have the majority, maybe can start gathering some information for Mr. Lang when he comes back.
I think it was Trustee Stoker's position to wait to give any direction to staff until the full board has had the opportunity to discuss.
Okay, that's fine.
Unless I'm misinterpreting, that's fine.
That was my opinion. I know you've done some preliminary work, but let's wait until Mr. Lang is back and we make a decision on this project before we do more.
All right. Do you have any comments?
No, other than thank goodness spring seems to be here finally. I hope it stays. We've been waiting a long time, and we're all enjoying the daffodils and the greening lawns, and let's hope the weather continues to be beautiful.
Yes. Well, I want to say that this is a great community. I love Westchester. I went to, last weekend, I went to Yellow Mushroom. There was an hour and 40 minutes wait, people to get in. I spoke to the general manager. He couldn't be more happier to be in Westchester. That he also commented that Westchester Township government is very easy to work with, and that business is good.
Yeah, we had some other good news. I'm sure everybody's heard that BAE Systems is consolidating outside of our area. Fortunately, O'Gara Hess has bought that part of their business, which up-armors private vehicles. So they are able to retain there's about 120 employees will remain employed that otherwise would have been unemployed. So that was good news.
All right. With that, I don't have anything else. Meeting, we have no executive session?
No executive.
I make a motion that
You make a motion to adjourn?
adjourn meeting.
I'll second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mrs. Stoker?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.